Let's talk about the pandemic now and the rollout of the COVID vaccine, which has begun in about a dozen African nations, including Algeria, Ghana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique and Kenya, to name a few. And the leaders of these countries and others have been encouraging citizens to take the jab by standing first in line to get the vaccine. Yet there's a lot of hesitancy and fear among some people. One woman who knows much about this is Zimbabwean Tatenda Makoni, who's a graduate clinical research assistant at the Center for Immunization Research at Johns Hopkins University in the United States. Part of her job includes reassuring those taking part in vaccine trials. And previously, she worked at the Center for Virology and Vaccine Research. Tatenda has been involved in the trials of the vaccines, including the Johnson & Johnson one and Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. She told me more about her involvement.
So when the pandemic started, right, every lab and everyone who does like infectious diseases was kind of like hands-on. And everyone was like, okay, what can we do? And for example, with the mRNA vaccines, like the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine, so mRNA technology has been in the works for the past 12 years. So I think, when the pandemic started, it was more of like, okay, how can we use this technology we have studied for years to help in tackling this pandemic? And even for like the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is an AD20 adenovirus vaccine that I was involved in, it was technology that's been, worked on for several years. So I think when the pandemic started, it was different institutions and different labs coming together to be like, how can we use the research we have gained over the past few years to help in mitigating the pandemic? So that's why now, and which is great for every one of us, that we have so many vaccines available. Because if you think about it, if we only had one vaccine, or let's say if we had only the Moderna vaccine, which is an mRNA vaccine, you've heard about like how it's stored and, like shipping can be hard. So just thinking about like, people in the continent of Africa, like how would you then transport that to most African countries? So having a wide net of vaccines is actually an advantage to all of us, where it's like, every one of them has different storages. And even though they might have, ranges in efficacy, they still 100% help you in preventing death and hospitalization. So which is the whole point of getting a vaccine.
What has been your involvement? How have you been involved in the whole COVID vaccine research? What have you been doing?
I was working at the Center for Virology and Vaccine Research, which is under Harvard Medical School in Beth Israel, when the pandemic started. So I began my work there in 2018. And then when the pandemic started in 2020, we kind of shifted our focus to COVID-19. So I was involved in the clinical research aspect of it. So my job was in helping to recruit volunteers who were coming in for, to participate in clinical trials. I was talking with the patient one-on-one. So I basically was the one educating the patient before they signed the consent and was there in the signing of the consent form. So one of the things I made sure to ask was I ask each and every one of them, like, why they were joining clinical studies and also what their families and friends thought of them joining clinical studies. And it was a wide range of answers. And, some people came in actually hesitant to join the study, but they did that because they wanted to, show their family members that, we should trust the science and, so it was a range. And then some people were excited to volunteer and help out.
So can I describe some of the, share with you some of the skeptical comments or comments we've had from people who say why they're so doubtful? For instance, one of the most popular ones we've been hearing here on BBC Africa is the feeling that these vaccines may contain fetal matter and that these have been produced or manufactured using fetal material.
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of that being posted on social media, and I can guarantee you that there is no fetal matter in any of the vaccines that we have right now.
Another fear there is that in using vaccines that people will be prone to having their DNA changed.
Yeah, so the vaccines do not alter a person's DNA at all. All the approved ones we have, none of them alter a person's DNA.
Tatenda Makoni, who is a graduate clinical research worker at the Center for Immunization Research at Johns Hopkins University in the United States. You're listening to Focus on Africa on the BBC World Service.